So a common question I get with building out my Proforma, whether it's for self storage or any commercial real estate asset class, is how do you get your start with analyzing these numbers? And people often want me to look over them. Well, typically I don't have the opportunity to go through that because there's just too much information to go through. But I wanted to go through this because this is a simple way to grasp what the purpose of your pro forma is and how to build it out step by step. I think oftentimes when people see a complicated pro forma with 17 to 30 pages, it just freezes them and they don't know where to start. What I typically find actually surprisingly is the people who are best at building out pro formas are actually people that have no background in real estate at all. It's actually people are just good at analyzing numbers for what they are and then they're just inputting them, and that's solely how it is. So the first task we're going to start with, and to kind of give you a background about this, I worked in commercial lending and residential lending for roughly about 5 years. And then I took that experience and took it over to Twin Oaks Capital and allowed it to basically figure out how I wanted to address gaps for my lending personally through our company funds to figure out a way that we could find gaps to find really quality assets to lend on that banks necessarily would not. So I have that perspective, but then I also have the perspective of being the loan officer about how I look over these. One of the things I find with pro formas oftentimes is they're not very readable. And even if they give you all the information they need, it just looks like one gigantic library. So going back to that example, so much information at once just getting slapped within the face. It's nice to have something nice and readable. So right off the bat, you can see with this is I have very nice, clear, bold-faced handwriting and in place for the lender to see. The other thing about this too as well is that I used to use a number of different tools. I use more than one, of course. I've used some of the best in the industry. Michael Blank's is a great one. But one of the things I liked about this template is that this was a template that or myself as a lender, when I worked for two large lenders, we would send this exact same template out because it was a really ultra simple template. And that way, then, if somebody never done one before, it wouldn't scare them away. It's easy for them to follow. But on the flip side, when they would send it back to us, and I was actually trying to put this together for loan committee, what I noticed is like, wow, I can just find everything exactly where I need to because I'm so familiar with using this. And so I liken this to, or, I have multifamily where we have tenants and we go to court. We use widely accepted leases that everybody in the area uses, and we've also used custom leases. And whenever we've had custom leases, the lawyers don't even bother to read it, or they just assume that we are trying to make it very landlord friendly. And so ultimately, it just becomes way more than they want to read through. And so that's why we want this, is that we want this to be so simple that there's less questions asked. It goes through the loan committee faster and requires less edits as us ever putting it together. So this first part, pro forma rent roll, what we are simply doing is we are grasping the unit number, the size, the square footage. The start and pay through is not a big deal unless you have a lot of tenants that are really pushed out far, because the bank sometimes will want to know how many people are on a month-to-month lease, how many people are, how long are these rents locked in for. And so simply, you're going to put the actual rent roll here, and then you're going to put your pro forma rents. Now, the reason why I like to do this line by line is because it allows you to go granular later on. If later I find out like, oh, these units, these 7 units are not renovated anywhere close to what we would need to get market rent, then I'm going to specifically change these items out. When you take that level of detail as you go through your pro forma, as you go through your due diligence, the bank notices that, and the bank is less likely to ask you more questions. We mentioned it a while ago that Twin Oaks Capital does feasibility studies in-house. At the very beginning, we used to always have to order them. But then, of course, over time, what happened is that the banks actually noticed that, like, wow, these feasibility studies that you are doing are the exact same as the third-party gurus that you guys are hiring to do. And the reason why is because we are doing such a good job. We're following all the same rules that I would turn around and give that to these third parties. They would essentially copy our feasibility study and give it back to us with their name on it. So by doing that, the more times you do this stuff correctly, the more times you answer these questions ahead of time, the less issues you're going to have with banks ask you questions. You're all going to find that the very first time you do a deal with a lender, they're going to ask you way, way more questions than your second, third, fourth, and fifth time. In fact, we've even gotten some deals too where they've already given us bank approval before we've gotten our pro forma out. simply because they just know that the numbers I've already started to calculate out, I've done them so many times that they know that they can trust it. Now, we're not going to get into this, but if you have a new build pro forma, then you're going to actually just go straight into putting in the pro forma rent and then go from there. But in this case, this deal is actually a hybrid of a new build and a construction. And then we have this tab right here. This tab right here is just going to summarize kind of what the whole layout of the land is, how many you have each units, how you can force value, and kind of go from there. So you can see here that, we might have this unit right here force $30 in rent. That's quite a big amount considering it's a 160 base price, but we only have 9 of them. So from here, this is going to be the first 2 tabs that you build out. This is very easy to have a VA do. It's not somebody that you need to have a real estate background. Again, like I said before, this is great for VAs. This is great for people that are very good with financial numbers. Simply basically just data entry, or even using an app like Adobe Acrobat or whatever to pull information from a rent roll. Now let's move on to the build out costs. You might not be new construction like we do, but we also do properties that have significant value add. So for example, we have a 40 plus unit property we're looking at that we probably will put $22,000 per unit in to turn it over. And so this is where we go with the line items, and this is where we're going to break it down. I like to do not too many line items, but I like to do a lot just so that way the bank sees like, wow, this is how granular this borrower is. And it also shows how much of a master we have. I'm not just using like, oh, we're just going to do $50 a square foot from generic number. Like, well, no, what am I specifically doing? So like in this case, legal. Okay, my legal, I actually will put an attachment and I'll show that. So then sometimes I'll put metrics in here showing that see attachment, see attachment, see attachment. We aren't guessing at numbers. We are actually using either historical data that we're referencing, or we are using actual quotes. So as you can see here, we have an actual, and we're kind of going through here. Now, ignore these numbers because these line items got kind of moved around because, some of these line items actually end up getting combined. But in reality, we actually were well under budget on this. Now, if you want bonus points, I would only do this primarily if you have a building construction background or you are actually going to be GCing the contract. Is I actually like to go January, February, March, April, and I do a 12-month, or I put out the entire month by month build out. And then what I'll do is I'll break down when that money will be spent over the course of the next 12 months. So it's basically a month and a month build out plan showing how everything is going to work. Now, you might get this through an appraisal or whatnot, but for them to actually see when you're going to spend it, that really tells them when, okay, this is roughly when we need to get our inspector out to do inspections for construction. It's also when we can expect that, you're going to be done with the project. And more importantly, it also justifies if we are asking for interest only. If I'm doing new build or new value add or construction, it's going to help me if I can say, well, I'm going to have 9 months of construction. So at a bare minimum, I would think that I need 9 months of interest only because I'm not going to be making money off of this property when these units or this new build construction is getting done. And then from there, we're going to break it into the projection. Now, one of the mistakes I constantly see people make is that, going back to this example, we can control forcing rents. We can control that by increasing value through renovations or simply bringing rents to market. What I dislike when I see this so often, I used to hate to see as a lender, is that let's say you use utilities. If the gas bill is $500 a month and you're simply going to say, well, the rule of thumb we have is $400 a month, the lender is not typically going to substantiate that unless you have a specific reason why. Are you going to switch out a furnace, which we believe will be 20% more gas efficiency? That's substantiated. Are you going to implement RUBS, where now the tenants have some responsibility for it, and so therefore, when they have more responsibility, they might use it less? That would justify a decrease as well. Simply just saying that it's high, we're going to get the tenants lower because this is the rule of thumb, is not going to work. And so even if the bank does accept that, I would implore you that you never focus on increasing anything unless you have simply something to substantiate. Management fee, okay? If you are getting management fee done at 6% versus 8.5%, then, and that's historically what your numbers are, then you can justify that by saying that, and then this is what we use it to reference here. Say Proforma insurance. 3% at $20 for tenant insurance. So we have all these assumptions that we kind of put in here. From there, then we also will go through each of the line items that we specifically can't control. So call center, okay? Do I have a quote from a call center that says we can do it for $855 when their pre-analysis says they're getting it for $1,050? If I do, then that justifies why I'm showing a lower number in the PL. It also shows how I can bring value to this deal by bringing costs down. Another one, insurance, okay? You might see that there's an opportunity to bring the cost for insurance by whether it's raising the deductible, whether it's changing some things for coverage, or because you have an umbrella plan that you're adding it to. All these things you will substantiate, and then you will actually reference in that. So then when the bank gets a Proforma from us, they're also getting an entire packet of vendor quotes to substantiate those two as well. Now, I'm going to skip through year 2, 3, 4, 5 quickly, but ultimately what we like to see is we like to see showing it increases everything. Your expenses are going to increase every year. Even if they don't, the bank wants to see that they're going to increase. Now, a secondary reason I like to do this too as well is that you might have a property management company that is very comfortable with just, giving the bare minimum or renewing the tenants. One of the reasons why I like to use this pro forma to show them kind of what our expectations are is because a lot of property managers don't realize that, wow, my property taxes are going up 5% a year. All my other costs are going up a year. So if our rent stayed the same, we actually are making less money versus more money unless we are actually in the process of a lease up. So this allows me to really hammer it home that, listen, we need to increase the revenue by at least this much to make as much as last year, and that's my expectation. I don't want to have the only source of income, which is unrealized, to be from principal pay down. So as a result, we want to make sure that this is why we need to have this much rent raises. This is why I need you to be comfortable, be uncomfortable with raising tenants more than just trying to keep them in there, because we need to at least maintain our cash flow over these years with this amount of minimum raise. From there, we will go into the cash flow analysis. So this is where we're going to show really what the bank is going to look at. This is where the bank is going to spend the majority of the time. To be honest, I say this kind of stuff is fluff. Most banks don't really look at these case-by-case numbers, but they like to know that you have a granular. Now, the difference between year 1 and year 5 is year 5, I actually will just keep these all the same across the board. But year 1, because we're getting more granular and the bank wants to know we can stick to our plan and really want to see, I will actually show changes in month to month. So if you see here, this is a property in Michigan. Snow plowing, I have my snow plowing making sense in November, December, January, February. Why? Because we have snow in those months. We don't have snow in July, contrary to what some people may think. So as a result, then I will really try to break it down case by case. This will also show where, okay, call center, maybe the call center doesn't start till November. So I really want to break this down, maybe year 1, year 2, until it's stabilized. Once it's stabilized, then I'll really keep the numbers kind of the same as we go. Now, these last few tabs are things I like to add in just to kind of show the bank, to show our mastery, and also show them our due diligence guide. One other thing that we put in here too as well that I didn't show on this is we actually have a deal summary tab with photos that summarizes in roughly about 500 words or less what we are doing, and I keep it to 2 or 3 bullet points on what we're going to do. So simply it's raise rents to market currently or just below to keep as much tenant retention as possible. But we also will take advantage of selective renovations to push the market when possible. Those renovations will be determined by a 2-year return, meaning that if I spend $22,000 now, through rent raises, we expect we'll get it back in 2 years. So really, I'm just kind of summarizing a summary of numbers and a summary of how we're going to basically really make this deal hum and make sense for the bank. From here, then I'm really going to put a budget. And this budget is going to be a number of costs. Some of these are going to get specifically from the bank. Some of them are going to get from the lender. And then a number of these will as well. The one thing you're going to want to keep in base is the operational reserves and debt service. This is really going to go back to how fast can you get your deal to have debt service coverage of 1.0, preferably closer to 1.2 as fast as possible. If I'm going to go, 9 months with negative cash flow, then I need much higher reserves than a property that cash flows from day one, right? Now, going to these next tabs, these are due diligence tabs. So we talk about the numbers and assumptions that we put. This is where I show actually that I am actually doing the due diligence to make sure that we verify these line items are presentable and doable. So we're actually putting these through because I'm not sending them 36 statements showing them that. Simply the fact that I put them here, most of the time the bank will take you at face value that you have these numbers, that you're not making them up. If they ask for it, then I have an organized folder showing them all these utility statements. And then lastly, the competitors tab. What's nice about the competitors tab too as well is that if your competitor tab is correct, we like to use green light, red light to show green that there are available units in the market. Red, there's not. So that's one thing into the true as well. But also too as well, it's very helpful to the appraisal. And so when the appraiser sees all this information, they can go from there. Now, depending on your asset class, you might have other due diligence items. But this kind of gives you a general idea of what you're looking for when building a Proforma. I don't expect that you're going to be able to do a Proforma from day one when you do this, but hopefully this helps you get in that right path where you can at least feel comfortable taking that first step.